This is the video lecture for Chapter 3, Key Issue 3 on migration and discovering the question why people migrate. So we can discuss a number of reasons for migration. We can narrow it down to two factors: push factors and pull factors. Push factors are those that induce people to move out of their present location, and pull factors induce them to move into a new location. So push factors are bad things, things people don't like. Push factors are things that attract people. There are three major types of push and pull factors, and we'll talk about some different examples from each. The first is political or social. The second is environmental, and the third is economic. Political factors can be especially compelling push factors, forcing people to migrate from a country. So when we talk about forced migration, we're often talking about political factors that are forcing people to leave their country. Examples can include war, especially civil war, government-sponsored oppression, where governments are targeting specific ethnic groups. For example, in Sudan, though the government has never taken responsibility for this, they supported attacks on non-Arab Sudanese, and most of the international community has agreed upon this, and it's very obvious. Forced eviction is another one, when people are forced to move out of their homes. Thinking about another example in Israel, Palestinians forced out of their homes. Often countries will grant them refugee status if they do not have anywhere else to go. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees recognizes three groups of forced political migrants. A refugee has been forced to migrate to avoid a potential threat to his or her life, and he or she cannot return for fear of persecution. So we mentioned the Lost Boys of Sudan. Just along on the same country or the same topic, I had a friend who was Sudanese, and his family had to leave Sudan and then had to leave Egypt because his father was a Christian pastor, and they were basically forced out and given refugee status because of all the death threats and the attempts on his family's life. So that's an example. An internally displaced person, an IDP, similar to refugee in that he or she is forced to migrate for fear of their life, but they don't go across an international border. So they're migrating, but within their own country. And an asylum seeker is someone who has migrated to another country in hope of being recognized as a refugee. So a lot of people who migrate here without documentation that will allow them to stay permanently, so without first acquiring visas or any other documentation like that, they are seeking asylum. So they're coming over, say, to the United States or to Canada and saying, it's not safe for me here, here's why, please give me asylum. Currently, the highest number of refugees comes from Syria, and I'm going to post a video as a companion to this video, which will help shed some light on the situation in Syria and in Europe, because we're seeing a massive flood. We have seen a massive flood of people out of Syria, and they literally just started walking across Europe. And I suggest you watch that video to get a sense of the largest immigration crisis in recent history. This map is showing 2012 data of international refugees, where they're leaving and where they're going to. Notice in purple, it's showing, in the dark purple, 1,000,000 and more, and in the lighter purple, somewhat less than that. But it's showing those regions in which people are leaving and receiving immigration status, but also IDPs, internationally displaced people. In green, you see where they're going. Notice not all refugees are just leaving Africa, right? Some are going to other countries within Africa that are taking them on. Just like the short video clip that you watched about the Sudanese boys, the lost boys. They were leaving Sudan, but were in a refugee camp in Kenya. No, I believe it was in Chad. Kenya would not make sense. Regardless, they were fleeing to another country. Take a few minutes or a few seconds, whatever you need, to look at this. You can pause the video now. All right, there are also social reasons for migration, not just necessarily political ones. Social factors can prompt migration from undesirable social climates or pull migrants to attractive regions. Now, a social pull factor may be that a particular country is known for promoting acceptance of various religions, sexualities, ethnicities, or gender equality. Or you just might like the culture, you might like the society. You might move to France because you love the food. But history has shown us that people are most interested in political and cultural freedoms. Basically, the ability to live their life how they want. And the United States is certainly a place known for that. But there are also social push factors. Countries that have hostility toward certain religions, hostility toward certain views on sexuality, or toward certain ethnicities, and countries that have a lack of gender equality. So someone may have grown up, for instance, in Saudi Arabia or in Iran, and have decided that though religion might be an important part of their life, they don't think it should dictate what they have to wear. And so they may be compelled to leave one of those countries that are very strictly religious. And then there are environmental factors that can prompt migration from hazardous environments or pull migrants to attractive regions. So some of the pull factors could include anything basically that's scenic, anything beautiful, mountains, seasides, warm climates. I took this picture in France, and this is basically what I daydream about every day. I want to be on that beach right there. This is in the Mediterranean, and the weather is just as wonderful as you might imagine. People could definitely be compelled to move here just for the environment. Or you might want to move here. Looks pretty cool, right? I took this picture in Tennessee. Not too far from us, about 4 hours east. But in the United States, most people who are migrating for climate reasons are migrating to the south. I haven't seen much evidence of this, empirical evidence, except what people have told me. I've met a lot of people from the north who said they just got tired of dealing with all the cold. And there's a lot of retirees, of course, who moved to Florida. And I did not take this picture, but that guy is a player. Now, there are also, sadly, environmental push factors, things that compel people to leave. Water is one of the most common environmental threats. Whether it is an abundance of water, too much, like a flood, or a drought, not enough water to sustain life. Here we've got overhead picture of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And as you can see, there's just no coming back from this. Of course, the city has rebounded, but not until after many, many people left because they had no home there. There are also people living in places like the Sahel, which is the region south of the Sahara Desert in Africa. And as desertification continues and the desert gets bigger and bigger and encroaches upon these people's land, they're forced to move because the land cannot sustain life anymore. Pollution is a big one, and this is one that, of course, human beings create. We have an effect on our environment, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways. Interesting phenomenon, I don't know if you would call it a phenomenon, but an interesting thing has been going on in China recently, that there is a whole new class of migrants. Now, we've looked at how so many poor rural Chinese migrants have been moving into the Chinese cities, right, in order to find work in these factories. But those same factories and all that industrialization and modernization has created so much pollution, so much fog, unnatural fog, that is giving people health problems. And so you really have a new class of Chinese migrants who are the wealthiest of the Chinese. And they're being compelled to leave the city and move back out into the country, or in many cases actually migrate internationally to other countries. And of course, on the last slide, famine was another one, which can coincide with a drought. When there's not enough food, you simply cannot live there. But most people migrate for economic reasons. The push factor is that people leave places that don't have many jobs. And of course, the pull factor is that people migrate to places that seem to have more jobs, seem to have a greater availability of jobs. The US and Canada have been prominent destinations for economic migrants. We have large economies, a lot of opportunity, especially for those who have lived in countries with small economies that aren't doing much. Now, this doesn't mean that the so-called American dream is necessarily attainable to everyone. And of course, it does depend on your definition of the American dream, but having your own house, raising a family with 2 cars, and vacationing every summer, it's just simply not possible for everyone. And a lot of migrants have been disheartened to realize that it's not as easy as it seems in the movies. Now, historically, individuals have migrated from Europe to North America, but more recently, the majority of migrants to the US and Canada are coming from Latin America and Asia. One other thing that I would like to note, remember, we can talk about international migration, but internal migration is important as well. And just within the United States, people migrate for economic reasons. Not necessarily just because they think they're going to get a better job, but because they think their money can go further somewhere else. And since the 1950s, the trend of people moving down south, remember that mean center population has slowly been moving toward the south, is in part because the cost of living is in general cheaper down here. I want to show you 2 pictures, just clippings that I took from the internet. I just went on a house search website and I went and looked around Southern California for just a second. I found this house. Seems like a pretty standard house that a family might get, a small family. 3 beds, 2 baths. Not huge, but a decent size, 1,644 square feet, and it's on sale. It's for sale for $749,000. Now, I took a similar budget and went searching for a house in Germantown. Found one in a gated community here. $370,000 though, which leaves a lot of money for vacations and whatever else you might like, eating out. And yet it's got 4 beds, 4 baths, and about 2,000 more square feet than this one. So the cost of living in the South here, for instance, is so much cheaper than somewhere like Southern California. Now, again, it's Southern California, so some people would say you get what you're paying for. The weather is amazing, there's celebrities, but I've known a lot of people to move to this region who said we just couldn't do it anymore. We needed more space. So there are migrants within the U.S. who are doing so because of cost of living differences.